Thank you everyone for showing up and coming through to the latest Crypto Happy Hour. Tonight, we have the pleasure of interviewing our very own Ernesto Ojeda, Puerto Rican born and raised. And he and his friend Steven are co-founders of Nectify. Today, we are going to be talking about blurring the line between games and finance. Thank you, Ernesto, for coming. I wanted to ask you, first of all, I wanted to let you know that I'm glad you came to speak with us. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into crypto, if that's possible.
Yeah, so I got into crypto while I was in college with Steven, my buddy and co-founder. I was studying industrial engineering, and he basically introduced me to Bitcoin. And we started from there, and I got really into it because of what I was studying and because I could make money. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we all have similar stories. We usually, once we get into crypto, we're eager to make more money. However it is that we got into it. So within the realm of crypto, there is this new phenomenon, and I say new entre comillas or between parentheses, right? Called non-fungible tokens, right? And I know you have vast experience, not just with your startup, but by yourself. You have also explored this world a lot. Can you tell us a bit about what NFTs are and how they're used nowadays, or how they could be used?
Yeah, so NFTs are basically just digital deeds of ownership that you register on a global immutable network like Ethereum or Solana. And basically NFTs, all they do is they just record a claim of ownership on something. And that something is something that usually in the NFT contract itself, it points to, for example, a URL, maybe it's of an image on the IPFS, or maybe it's URL of a website or a code base, whatever. And it says that you're staking a claim of ownership over that thing, and somebody can check your wallet and see if you have that NFT in your wallet. And if you do, then you're the rightful owner of that thing, which is way better than the current way of recording a claim of ownership on something, which, for example, if I wanted to claim ownership over this watch, I'd have it on me because it's a physical, tangible thing. And if I wanted to claim ownership of my car, I would go to the DMV and register it there. But the problem with the DMV is that the DMV's scope is limited to its political jurisdiction, whereas an NFT, the claim of ownership that you make on an NFT is limited to the global network. And so you're able to have something that is recognizable anywhere in the world, regardless of the political jurisdiction that you reside in.
Yeah, we know that NFTs have a variety of uses worldwide. You mentioned a few, and I'd really like to dive in because with Nectify, I know you guys work with video games, or more specifically, play-to-earn video games. So I wanted to ask you about what role do you see NFTs playing in the video game space?
That's a great question. So NFTs basically enable people who play games they enable games to become more than just games. Because the thing with games is that you can't really own any of the items, right? Before NFTs, you can't really own any of the items within the game. And the game assets were already pre-created by the people who developed the video game. So all the game assets have been created, and you have to kind of trust the video game developer, if you're buying assets within the game, to honor your claim of ownership over those assets. Whereas with NFTs, you can either introduce new game assets to the game, right, from outside of the game, because some NFTs, they come with an objects file, but you can also just own the item outright without having to trust the game developer that you are the rightful owner of that asset. And that also enables games to be able to kind of introduce new economic models that go just beyond like the traditional Fortnite or Call of Duty, for example. And then games kind of become more than games. It almost becomes like it becomes like a real economy, and it just happens to be a game.
Now that you bring up the new economy, right, it just feels natural to talk about play to earn. I don't know if you guys have heard about what play to earn is, but I know Steven works with this, so Steven, can you enlighten us on what play to earn is and what we're seeing today in regards to play to earn games?
Yeah, so all a play to earn game is basically, people call it play to earn. I see it more of as a gig, because people are not playing play to earn games because they're fun. If you've played Axie Infinity, or if you've played Aurora, for example, you'll know that those games are not fun. People instead, they play them because the games make them money. So it's a gig for you to play a game, and it just so happens that you get paid for playing the game. So a play to earn game is just a game that happens to be gameplay. So when you actually play the game, that's how you're able to mine the token. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Yeah, Axie Infinity is a rather unique case. It feels kind of like a fusion of a yield farm and a type of video game, right? But I think we can all agree this is one of the first times we've ever seen something like this be used in the world, or be explored. So earlier this week, when we were talking about NFTs, you guys, the Nectify team, brought up the news regarding Steam and Epic Games and their respective responses towards NFTs. Some people are embracing them, other people are shunning them. Why do you think this happens?
So, quick thing. So, play to earn games are not the first time that games pay you to play. World of Warcraft used to do that with their gold. The difference is that you don't have to sell the gold on eBay and trust somebody to give you the account or to send it to you. You can just now do it through the NFTs. And the second part is with Steam and with Epic Games. So Steam is basically taking or delisting any game that uses NFTs. For context, any game that uses NFTs, they're taking it off their platform, which kind of sucks. But it's also kind of like the blockbuster move. And Epic Games, on the other hand, is embracing NFTs, and they're basically looking for ways to implement it in their games, like Fortnite, for example, which makes perfect sense because kids already pay $50, $60 a month on Fortnite skins that they can't own. Imagine what's going to happen when they can actually own them, and not just own them, but also play and start making money on the game. So yeah, I think it's like a blockbuster Netflix moment between Epic Games and Steam, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
You more so mentioned some of the big players in the game, Epic Games. They have Fortnite. I think everyone here has heard of Fortnite. Fortnite has had concerts from all sorts of artists from all over the world on their platform. And we also have Steam. And Steam is a pillar of the internet gaming community. They really do have, I believe, one of the largest selections of video games. And people have been using it for decades. I've known about Steam for at least 10 years. I could be. Let me not discredit myself. Anyways, when it comes to people like you and me, how can we get involved with NFTs and gaming, and where does the finance come into this?
So how can you get involved? I would say start with Axie Infinity. It's a pretty simple game, and it's all like Pokemon. There's 2 ways that you can participate, or there's like 3 ways actually that you can participate in Axie Infinity. The first way is you can become a breeder. So that means that you're breeding Axies. The second way is you can become a player, which means that you're just playing the game. And the third way is that you can become a patron. So a patron just means that you can purchase a lot of Axies, and then you can just rent them out to players, because oftentimes these players, they can't afford the Axies, the NFTs themselves, so you rent them out to them in exchange for like a revenue share. And yeah, there's a couple of other games on like Solana and on Ethereum, but they haven't really figured out their product market fit yet. I would say play Axie as a way to get started.
Yeah, I definitely heard of different games on your chat, right? Shameless plug. I wanted to ask you, specifically, what role does Nectify play in the game and finance world? And how can people get in touch with your platform, view what services you offer, etc.?
Yeah, so what we do at Nectify is we're basically like the compound finance of game NFTs. So you can become a supplier or lender, whatever you want to call it. If you have a surplus of NFT assets, you can just supply it to one of our pools, and then we use those NFTs to lend them out to players so they can participate in a play-to-earn game, like Axie Infinity, for example. And in exchange, you get to keep 25% of their play-to-earn rewards, which essentially makes it a yield-generating NFT.
So I don't know if you guys caught that, but I think that's really interesting. Really, it was a rather quick interview. I don't know if the audience has any questions. Now would be the time to ask them. Please, you can come here.
And what kind of money are you talking about to purchase the NFT?
All right, so the question was, what type of money are we talking about to purchase the NFTs? The Axies?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the floor price, meaning that the cheapest Axies right now are between $140 and maybe $200 each one. And that's it.
You pay them in ETH, right?
Yeah, you do pay on ETH, but the whole transaction takes place on an Ethereum sidechain called Ronin. And that's for Axie. There's other games like, for example, Sandbox, but I think you were specifically talking about Axie, so.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Dan and Steven, for that answer. Does anybody else have any other question they would like to ask before we cut the live stream? Puerto, do you want to come up over here and ask your question? You can do it on camera.
So I'm actually looking into launching a project that has to do with gaming, play to earn, and everything like that. Which projects do you recommend? Because I'm familiar somewhat with crypto, but I've never been a gamer. So what projects would you suggest looking into as a good example of different features that are cool, and some new games where you see newer features that are going to be introduced, or even the tokens? What game tokens? Because I know I see a lot of influencers on YouTube, and they're like, play to earn tokens are about to go parabolic or whatever. Is there one specifically that you like? I know it's kind of a loaded question, but.
Thanks, Puerto, for your question. Ernesto, sorry.
Let's see. The first game that I would really recommend is just Axie Infinity. The reason why is because they seem to have the most product market fit right now, with 2 million daily active users, most of whom are in the Philippines and Venezuela. So Axie Infinity seems to be the one game that it's like the Bitcoin of play-to-earn games. The second game that I would recommend is I would check out Star Atlas on Solana. Star Atlas is really promising, and again, using the Bitcoin Ethereum analogy, Axie Infinity is like Bitcoin, right? In 2015 or 2014, and Star Atlas is like Ethereum in 2014, meaning Star Atlas still hasn't launched anything yet, but it's really fucking promising. And it's gonna be, if they manage to achieve what they say they're gonna launch on their white paper, it'll be big. So Star Atlas, check out Aurora as well. There's other games like Soul.town. These are all on Solana, by the way. On Ethereum, I would check out, Axie used to be on Ethereum, but there's not that many promising play-to-earn games on Ethereum because of the transaction fees.
Star Atlas? Do they have a code? Star Atlas?
Yeah, I think it's called Polis or something like that.
It's called Atlas.
Atlas, is it? Okay.
What about Cardano?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if they have any play-to-earn games. I haven't checked them out. So.
Would you say that Solana is like the future for gaming? Is that going to be the winner in that space?
Do I think that Solana is going to be the winner in the game space? I don't know. It's really hard right now to like guess which L1 is going to be the winner. It's just that Solana seems to have the cheapest transaction fees. And so obviously so one thing that you have to understand about people who play to earn games is that they don't really give a shit about crypto. They are people who, it's the first time they played crypto and they were introduced to this game and it just makes them money and it works, right? They don't play the game because they actually like the game. They play the game because it makes money. And so unless Ethereum figures out a way that's like solve for transaction fees, those people are, and when I say those people, I mean people in Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Philippines, they can't afford to pay like $100 transactions. They're not going to be playing those games. And I think that's where play to earn games, that's where they seem to have like, that's their user essentially. They need to figure out a way to appeal to users who can't afford $100 gas fees. So.
Yes, I have a question.
Luigi, yeah, do you want to ask your question here?
Yeah.
So your definition of play to earn, I've always wanted to ask this, like for someone that has a protocol. I'm used to subscriptions, someone buying the game, like you want a game, you pay $50, and there you get the game. So when we talk about play to earn and with the tokenomics or whatever, where's that money generated from? And I know it goes to the player, but at the end of the day, where's the profit going to come from?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a pumped question for Avi. No, I'm kidding.
So I'll use Axie Infinity as an example because it's the simplest game and it's the one that I understand the most. So in order to, you can't just, so the characters, the Axies, right? They're like these Pokemon characters. They're the NFTs. In order to participate in Axie Infinity, you need 3 Axies to play. And what the Axies do is as you play the game using your team of Axies, you're able to mine SLP. And SLP is the game token, the play to earn reward token for Axie Infinity. The thing is that you need SLP and you also need another token, which is Axie Infinity's governance token called AXS, to serve as the raw materials in order to be able to create more Axies. Which you need more Axies because as more players come on board into the game, you're going to need more Axies, and so it's a very circular economy where the Axies are like the capital good that produce the raw material that's required to create the capital good. It's really interesting, and it's the simplest case of how play to earn game economies work. Star Atlas is even more fucking complicated and out there, but Axie, like I said, is like, it's like the Bitcoin of play to earn. It's fucking simple and it just works. The only thing with Axie is, this is my fear and I'm speculating here, and I could be wrong, but the only thing with Axie is you need more new players in order to keep the machine going. I think, I'm speculating here, but and I could be wrong, just like a lot of people were wrong about Bitcoin in 2011, right? But unless they're able to continue to get more new players, and those more new players are able to fuel demand for new Axies, so that the amount of SLP that's being minted is being burned at an equivalent rate, because there's no cap on the number of SLP that you can create, right? It's all about gameplay. And the thing is that if they can figure that, that's why also Axie's rushing to like do a bunch of patches with Axie Infinity. They've lowered the amount that you can mint per day. They've increased the amount of SLP that's required in order to be able to create more Axies. And again, this is just Axie Infinity, right? There's dozens, and there will be hundreds, and maybe 5 years from now there will be thousands of play to earn games with completely different economies. And I think I'm excited for like games that are going to be like Grand Theft Auto, where it's almost like a simulated economy of the real world economy. That'll be really interesting. Yeah, the real metaverse.
I have a follow-up.
We have a question from Dan, and we also have another question in the back.
So we have all of these migrant workers in Malaysia and the Philippines that are not going out and working, but they're making money in their bamboo abodes, playing games and making 2 to 3 times what they would normally make out working out in the fields. What's going to happen? Sorry.
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm excited for that.
Who's going to be harvesting the food?
So here's how I think of so I'm gonna, you're asking what's gonna happen when people can earn more money playing play-to-earn games than they do playing real life
Or in the
games,
traditional ones.
right?
Exactly.
Traditional ones, yeah. The answer is, it's exactly what you think is gonna happen. They're not gonna actually produce in the real world, they're gonna produce in the metaverse. And it's going to be a lot like Ready Player One, in my opinion, where so here's how I see it, the big picture for the metaverse is, I see the metaverse almost as a membrane that sits on top of the real world, and that membrane allows people to be able to make just as much money as they would, regardless of their location, right? Because we're familiar with being able to make more money if you live in a developing or in a developed country than if you live in a developing one. So there's a big fucking opportunity to arbitrage the value of human capital across countries. But it costs a lot of money because of transportation in the real world and real world friction, right? There's this thing called time, and you're kind of restricted to it. Whereas in the metaverse, things travel at the speed of light. And so essentially arbitragers, if you think of human capital as liquidity pools in the US and in the Philippines or Malaysia or Venezuela, they're going to arbitrage between that value of human capital until somehow it reaches equilibrium. And I think those people living in those countries, maybe even in this country, in Puerto Rico, people don't produce value because they like to, right? That's why it's called a job. They do it because it makes them money. And whatever makes them more money is what they're gonna go towards, just incentives. And if the game makes them more money than the real world does, they're gonna go for the game. And so, I don't know what implications that's gonna have on the real world economy, but I think it'll be really interesting seeing how, in the same way that Bitcoin is a sponge of real world assets, play-to-earn games I think will become like a sponge of just human capital and labor, yeah. And that's gonna be fucking cool.
I like you're excited. We have a question from Luna.
Hi, so you mentioned briefly about Nectify, about your project or your company. So is it also a play to earn platform? Is it, what is the product? What is and also a follow-up question. You mentioned lending your tools from Axie into Nectify. So how would we know what kind of tools are needed, to lend?
Thank you, Luna. Good question.
Gotcha. So what Nectify does, all Nectify does is it crowdsources. I guess I gotta give some context as to how Axie works. To play Axie, you need 3 Axie Infinity teams, or 3 Axies, and they each cost $140, which to us may not be a lot, but to most people in the world, that is a lot of money. So what we do is we crowdsource those Axies. Maybe you have 100 Axies, and you only need 3 to play, so you have 97 that are surplus. So what do you do with that surplus? You put it to work. So you lend it to us, and what we do is we lend it to players across the world, and they use those surplus assets that you lent them to be able to produce SLP. And then what we do is we do those 97 Axies that otherwise would have sit in your wallet doing nothing. They become a yield, generating asset. Kind of like how compound finance works, right? If you have a surplus of Ethereum that you're not going to be spending, what you do is you just lend it or supply it to compound finance or Aave, and you put it to work so that somebody else can use that liquidity, tap into it, whether it's a D-app or a person. In our case, we're doing the same thing, but with game NFTs instead of fungible tokens. So, does that answer your question, or is there? Okay, awesome.
All right, we have one more question, right? No? Roberto, no? Yeah, all right, the last question, because we need to give Ernesto a break.
Just to piggyback what she said, so if you get paid in the SLP? Yeah. Okay, and
The question is, do you get paid in Smooth Love Potions and X Infinity? And the answer was yes?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Another question?
What's the yield?
I think last time I checked today, it was 55 point something percent, but the average over the last 30 days has been like 80 something percent. It's pretty high.
And then the NFTs, let's say, using that same example, you've got 100 NFTs, those could also go up in value as well, right?
They could, yeah.
Yeah, so you can make it both ways, ideally, obviously.
Exactly, yeah. The idea is that you can hodl it and earn money while you hodl as well.
All right, guys. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to everyone that tuned in on Facebook Live, and of course, everyone that came in person. I hope you can be with us next week. And I'd like to give a round of applause to Ernesto Ojeda from Nectify for coming to speak with us. And that would be all. Thank you.